Okay, good morning, everybody. Very excited to talk to you about seller financing. This is our seller financing webinar part two. Part two. Now, this is something we covered last week, but I think it bears hearing again. You can never hear seller financing enough, and especially why you're not seller financing. You know, I was thinking about this today in preparation for the class, and why don't people seller finance more? There's a lot of reasons. I want to go over some of those with you. Then we're going to cover some seller financing objections, because one of the reasons that you don't do that is you don't understand how to overcome the objections. We're going to do that powerfully today so that you literally understand every which way you can overcome seller financing objections. This will give you lots of ability to move forward with great seller financing success. So let's talk about that. So why don't you do seller financing? Why aren't you seller financing a lot? Now, the first couple of reasons, and these aren't on here. The first one is an excuse that it's a hard market to seller finance in. Every market's a great market to seller financing. And now I will admit that markets that are okay and markets that are poor and markets that are very bad do lend themselves nicely to seller financing, because sellers do get desperate. But the premise of seller financing is that seller financing is better for the seller than it is the buyer. And as soon as you start to believe that, and as soon as you arm yourself with the education to back that up, you'll start seeing seller financing. It'll happen a lot. I see seller financing deals quite frequently, especially as you get into more and more profitable properties. It's just the way business is done. So let's run through this real quickly. I've got some great things, and we're going to go into seller financing objections. We're going to talk about how to overcome those objections. We're going to talk about the due on sale clause. We're going to talk about how to neutralize objections, and we're going to talk about the 2 to 3 terms method, which is a great method to move forward. So the first reason you don't get seller financing is you don't know how to think like a seller when you're acting like a buyer. So if you're out looking for properties, you don't know how to think like the seller does. And I tell you, win-win transactions happen when you understand both sides of the transaction intimately. And you can't do that if you don't know how to think like a seller. Now, sadly, most of us have not been a seller enough times that we naturally think about how it is to be a seller. We understand what it's like to sell. We haven't been through enough transactions or enough deals. Number two, you haven't been a buyer nearly enough times. You just haven't done a lot of real estate transactions, and that comes through. If you sit down with somebody and you think you're talking to them and you're doing well, people can tell. People can tell that you don't know a whole bunch about real estate. Now, not everybody knows, because a lot of the people you'll be working with might be as green or greener than you are, and that's okay. But it's the conviction in your voice that you know what you're talking about. It's the conviction in your voice that makes people believe that you know what you're talking about because you've done it, or you've got a support system around you. You've got some experts around you that are going to help you. That's one of the reasons, quite honestly, that I have done a lot of partnering with my students. Is it's very simple for a new student who hasn't done a lot of real estate transactions, or any in that case, to sit down and look somebody in the eye and say, we can do a great deal. We can do a win-win transaction. I got a partner that's done a lot of stuff. He's happy to get involved with you. Let's talk. Let's get going and get a deal structured with those people. And if you don't have confidence in yourself yet, hopefully you can certainly have confidence in me and what I've done, and we can work on a partnership. I'm more than happy to partner with people on a high level and get things done. So number three, you don't understand the sheer volume of working parts in a real estate transaction. Now, this isn't just from the reference point of real estate itself and a contract and the parts. It's more specifically, and those are important too, because again, you got to be able to sit down and talk educatively about someone. The first time somebody says, hey, and asks you a question, and you look like you don't know the answer, and you act like you don't know the answer, you're done. You're toast. They're going to be very guarded in working with you. They're going to wonder, what else don't you know? So you don't understand the sheer volume of working parts in a real estate transaction and in a seller finance transaction. So seller financing has a lot of different parts that you don't utilize in a normal real estate transaction. And there are a lot of parts that you utilize differently than seller financing. So the next one is you don't have a bunch of capital raised. You know, when I walk into somebody and write them 2 offers, I say, hey, here's a cash offer for you, and here is a seller financed offer for you. The first thing that says to them is, I've got cash. And one of the biggest objections people have to working with you is they don't trust you, and they don't believe you. They think you're asking for seller financing because you don't have any other options. You can't get a bank loan. And the reality is if you hand them a cash offer, they can't say that. They can't look you in the eye and say you're not qualified. So that's a big one. is if you have a bunch of capital raised. I get asked all the time, well, Mike, what should I do first? Should I raise capital or should I get some deals seller finance first? Which one's better? And the answer is yes. This is kind of the yin and yang of real estate investing. The more money you raise, the more seller financing you'll be able to get. The more seller financing you get, the more capital you'll be able to raise. And people always ask what comes first, seller financing the capital or the deal itself? And again, the answer is yes. If you have cash that you've raised and you have a place to place it, a place to use it, you're going to be very aggressive about finding some deals or finding capital, to fund that deal. Or if you have enough cash to be deadly and you can go in and get seller financing, then there's a fantastic benefit that way. Absolutely. So we want to get the ability to get seller financing done, but you have to have some capital raised. So start doing all those three things together. So the right answer to those last couple of questions is aggressively look for deals, aggressively be talking about capital, aggressively be soliciting seller financing. It's a great option there. Now, the other reason is you don't understand the 4-offer spreadsheet and program. Spreadsheet is going to be a fantastic option for you to take a look at exactly how to present deals, win-win deals to sellers that make you look like an absolute professional, that make you look like a superstar, that make you look like you know exactly what you're doing. And it is the coolest program ever. And we'll have to get that out to you soon here. Now, the last reason on this sheet here is you don't understand or know how to manipulate terms. There are over 20 terms. Now, people say, what's a term? Well, a term are one of the working parts in a real estate transaction, more specifically, a seller-financed real estate transaction. And you sit down with sellers, and most sellers will say to you, I have 2 or 3 important things. And I don't say I have 2 or 3 important things. I sit down with them and I say, hey, what are you hoping to get out of this transaction? And they'll say, I want A, B, and C. And I'll say, okay, well, do you believe in win-win transactions? Is it okay if I can get those things for you? Will you work with me too? Will you do some of the things that I need for you too? Now, the vast majority of sellers will say yes. Now, there are some guys out there that say, I only care about what I get. And if you can't come up with it, then I'll wait for someone that can. And some people are like that, but it's very, very infrequent. Most people are rational and say, gosh, if this guy can meet my needs, I'll meet his too. And what I found is that's very, very true. So you want to make sure that you understand the terms, because I'll tell you this, one of the things I'm going to talk about today is what's called the 2 or 3 terms method. And that essentially means if a seller demands 2 or 3 things out of their sell, then you have another 20 to 25 of them to work with. And we'll go through that and some examples today when we get towards the end of the conversation. But these are the reasons that you don't seller finance. Now, the first thing I want to do, and here's some examples of terms. Let's run through these again. There's at least 20 plus here on this one. And there's a lot of neat stuff here that you can take a peek at. We'll kind of come back to this. Here's the 2 or 3 terms method. We'll come back to that in a second too. But the first thing I want to do is go over objections. Because one of the things that I do is when I start talking about seller financing, everybody in the room is so aggressively ready to raise their hand and say, the seller has this objection. The seller won't do seller financing because of this. The seller won't do seller financing because of that. I'm actually going to give you a succinct list of everything sellers have ever told me as reasons why they wouldn't do a seller finance deal for me. Now, then I'm going to tell you what the solutions are. The solutions here in just a minute, but I want to make sure I articulate the objections well, because I tell you, I could probably articulate them better than you can because of how many times I've heard them and how many different ways I've tried to overcome them. And part of this comes from the fact that I don't like being told no. So when a seller tells you no, hey, no, I won't do that, most of you say, okay, all right, well, I just thought I'd ask. And I go at them a dozen different ways. I go at them again and again and again. We go at them. So this is a fantastic benefit for you to understand. Now, the first thing we're going to do is go through the objection column. Then we're going to go through the solutions column, but we're going to do that in kind of a roundabout way. So don't pay attention to the column on the right here because it'll make more sense in a minute. So the first objection that we have is education. Now, nobody ever sits down. It's been very rare in my career where I've made an offer to someone and they say, I just don't know what seller financing is, so I won't do it. Most people think they have an idea what it is, or are afraid of it, or don't know what it is, so they just simply say no. And what you have here is the objection is a lack of education. Now, that's a problem because it's not just on the seller's part. If you're working with a realtor, whether you're represented by one as a buyer or the seller is represented by a realtor, the problem is realtors don't understand seller financing either. And so a realtor is typically going to be the biggest seller financing killer in a transaction. They just won't consider it because they don't understand it. So the first one is education. I tell you, sellers will not do what they don't understand. They just won't, unless they're very, very desperate, and then they'll be grumpy about it afterwards. So you have to educate them. Now, I'm not saying, hey, I'm going to come over and present an offer tonight and let's have a 2-hour seminar before I make the offer. I'm saying come over and explain to them in the form of benefits. The benefits of seller financing. And I don't always sit down and say, hey, I want to offer you seller financing. Would you consider seller financing? I sit down and I present it much differently. I sit down and say, hey, I'd like to offer you more than your asking price if you'll take the money from me over time. Now, in a market that's a little bit difficult, if our seller's a little bit high on their price, or there's something going on there with the property being difficult to sell, somebody sits down in front of you and says, I'm willing to offer you more than your asking price if you'll take that money over time. And that's seller financing. That's seller financing all the way. I don't sit there and say, well, will you seller finance? I talk to them about the benefits. So you always want to start with benefits. So number one is everybody in the real estate transaction has to be educated about seller financing, or at least the benefits that the seller's going to get. And especially you have to be educated. This is not free and easy. I was thinking about this morning when I was getting ready to do this. Seller financing isn't free and easy. It's tough. You got to want it. You got to earn it. You got to role play it. You got to do it. You got to ask every time so that you get in the habit of learning what that is and how it works. So number one is education. Okay. Number two is trust. Now there's a couple of ways that they can trust you, but personally, I've had people look me in the eye and say, I don't trust you. Well, okay. Well, let's fix that. Let me show you how and why you can. So trust can be a number of things. I don't trust that you're going to take care of the property. I don't trust that you're going to make the payments. I don't trust that you're going to pay me off. I don't trust that you have a down payment. I don't trust that you can qualify. I don't trust you have good credit. I don't trust that you have good tax returns. This is a big one. Trust is a big one. And I'll tell you, as soon as you start talking to them about benefits and how they can be protected while they're receiving those benefits, trust issues generally go away. That's the other reason I like to write cash offers along with my seller finance deals. It's hard not to trust somebody that's walking around with a chunk of cash. What that means is yeah, this guy's got cash. He's just not going to pay full price for cash. You write a 70 cents, 75 cents on the dollar cash offer and a near or full price or at full price seller finance deal that has a small down or no down at all. That's very hard for them to say you're not a professional. It's very hard for them to say you can't qualify. It's very hard for them to say you don't have any money. Cash offer in your hand. So that's a good benefit that way. Now, so we'll talk about overcoming trust and that also. The next one is the trust issue also, but they're afraid you're going to make the payments. Well, I do seller financing if there's a guarantee that you're going to make the payments. And I can't tell you guys how many times I've heard someone say, I would do it, but I don't want to come back and foreclose on you later. And that would be terrible. And I don't want to do that. And that's an issue for me. So receipt of payments is a big one. You need to overcome the fact and make them believe that you're going to make payments. Number four, buyer qualifying. Guys, it's been probably, 20 years since somebody said to me, I'm not going to seller finance to you because I just don't think you'll qualify for a bank loan. And there's ways to overcome that at the beginning, but when you come in to make a professional presentation with a professional multiple offer presentation, it's very hard for them to say you don't qualify. Very hard. I'll oftentimes start off seller financing, an attempt at seller financing, by saying, hey, I got a couple of options for you. I've got a cash offer that's low. I got a seller financing that's a lot of cash and some seller financing. I got a high priced offer that's seller financed. Or we can do a traditional purchase, which I don't want to do because the banks are very difficult to deal with. and I've got a lot of properties in my portfolio. So banks are just difficult to deal with, but I can meet all the needs that you have. And if we can find out what they are, I can meet every one of them compellingly. I can't meet them. I can meet them compellingly. And I'll tell you, they stop right there. They don't come back and say, well, I don't think you can do this because you can't qualify. Well, I just told you I have a cash offer here. I just told you that I can qualify for the bank, and it makes it difficult. Back in the day, I had 650 apartments. I had a dozen companies. or LLCs. I had 20 plus developments going all over the country. And my tax returns looked like a phone book. I mean, it was brutal. I'm trying to turn that into a bank and getting them to understand what was in that tax return and getting the green light on something like that, even when I had a traditional 20, 30, 40% down. It was difficult. And it oftentimes took bankers 90 days to get to where they could tell me exactly what they would do and wouldn't do. It was very difficult. So buyer qualifying is one you can knock out easily with a professional presentation. And most of these, in fact, are. The next one is, I don't think you're going to take care of the property. You'll let it go to pot. I don't want to take it back and have to remodel. You'll put a bad tenant in there. You won't mow the lawn. You won't. And the fact of the matter is that's an issue. I've had quite a few sellers over the years tell me, gosh, I take such good care of these properties, and I don't know, no offense, Mike, but I don't know if you're going to take care of it the same way as I am. And I'd be nervous, if I think you'd make payments, but if you didn't and I had to foreclose on you and take it back in 6 months, a year, who knows how much money I'd have to spend to get it back to the condition that it's in right now. So I don't believe you're going to take care of the property. Next one is little or no down payment. Little or no down payment. So the little or no down payment is one we've kind of danced around a little bit here. Is I don't want to seller finance you because you don't have a down payment, or you have a small down payment, or there's no money. So we certainly want to make sure that we can knock that one out. And again, writing a cash offer, we'll talk about the 4-offer spreadsheet here in a little bit, but that one knocks that out. But you can talk about that. That's an objection I hear. Next one is capital gains. I don't want to seller finance to you because if I sell the property, I have to pay capital gains tax. So I don't want to pay capital gains tax. And Mike, I'll sell this. And this is one of the first ways I became an expert at seller financing. Is I went in as a young realtor investor 20 plus years ago, and I started asking for seller financing on multifamily deals. And people would constantly tell me, no, I'll sell this building over my dead body. And I don't want to pay capital gains tax. So that's a big issue there. And how do we overcome their capital gains tax? How do we take care of their capital gains tax? Next one I hear a lot is, seller financing with you, I can't get my money out. I have equity in the property. This is a $500,000 property. I only owe $300,000. I need my $200,000 to go buy my next property. Okay, so that one. And then the next one, number 9, is kind of the partner to that, is a $300,000 first mortgage, and you wrap it. You do you wrap that mortgage and do an all-inclusive trust deed, paid off. And unfortunately, I won't qualify for my next property, so it's very important to me that I do that. I can't seller finance to you. The next one is the due on sale clause. We're going to talk about that here in just a minute. The due on sale clause, most mortgages contain a clause that says, so if you're a Joe homeowner and you buy a house, you get a mortgage from ABC Bank. ABC Bank gives you a mortgage, and in that mortgage, there's a clause called the due on sale clause. And what it says, and most people don't even know what it says. Most people have never actually even read one. And what the due on sale clause says, that if you sell the property, the mortgage may the loan due and payable. So what that means is if you sell your house, that you have to pay your loan off if the bank calls the loan due. So that mortgage is essentially due on the sale of the property. Now, most people think, gosh, if Mike buys my property and I don't pay off the mortgage and Mike starts making the payments each month, then we're going to be in trouble, because if the mortgage company finds out, they'll call the loan due on sale. And that's a kind of a concern, but we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a second, because it's to me it's kind of a null and void issue based on the structure of our program and the foundation to success. Now, the other reason we hear a lot is I lose my tax advantages. I own this real estate property because it gives me a lot of write-offs and deductions, and it shelters my income from taxation. And that's true. And we can talk about that, but we'll overcome those here in just a minute. But loss of tax advantage can be a benefit. We can talk about putting them in other investments that get tax advantages as well. So those are the objections. Now, what I learned over many years of training people and overcoming negative stereotypes about seller financing, and what I learned over speaking with sellers on many occasions about this, is that there's 4 main neutralizers. So we overcome seller financing objections with 4 different objection killers. So essentially, you can kill the objections with this information right here. And this is very powerful. So I want to go over these in detail. And then what I'm going to do is go back to each one of the objections and show you how we'll overcome those. And then some of them, you can use these together. So you don't just have to use objection number 1 or objection number 2 or 3. Sometimes you can use all of them. And the more of them you use, the more compelling and powerful it becomes. So the first seller financing objection killer is occupancy. So the seller will not have to get a new loan. So essentially, and I'm going to, instead of reading these to you, I'm just going to kind of explain what they're meant to mean, and then we'll go back case by case on how they might work. So the first one is occupancy. So one of the reasons I get a lot of seller financing is I don't go in and ask for 30-year seller financing. I don't sit down with the seller and say, hey, would you seller finance your property for 30 years? The foundation to success that we practice says that we're going to find a property, we're going to analyze it, we're going to purchase it using other people's money or other people's mortgages. After we evaluate that for its highest and best use, and once we close on it, we'll immediately put it back up for sale. Then we'll create and enhance equity with our activities. And then after that, we'll either sell it for a profit or refinance it for an equity position. So whatever financing I get when I purchase a property, 99 times out of 100, I'm intending on selling that property for a profit or refinancing that property for an equity position within the first year to 18 months, worst case. So what that means is I never have to ask for seller financing for more than a year to 18 months. So if I buy a $500,000 property and the seller gives me a $500,000 seller finance note, I go in and put a flag lot in the back and build a fourplex back there. Then I sell the properties, and guess what? That money is getting, that mortgage on the front of that house is going to get paid off in a year or less, or like 18 months or less. If I want to keep those properties long term, I'll refinance them into a regular mortgage. When you refinance them, the seller gets paid off. Now, I might sell the house in front and pay the mortgage off and keep the fourplex in back. This is, I never go in and ask for or intend to have 30-year seller financing. Now, I will do 10 years, or I have done 30-year mortgages that don't have prepayment penalties in them, so I can pay them off when I want. So, but I don't intend to use seller financing. Not necessarily the best mortgage for many, many years. You might have a slightly higher interest rate. If you're going to have a higher interest rate, you might as well get a bank loan and suffer through that to keep a property long term, if it's going to be a long-term asset that you hold. Are either going to be sold for a profit or refinanced for an equity position, and either way, they're paid off. So occupancy can be simple. If I buy a property and it has a 30-year mortgage on it with a 1-year call or a 6-month call or a call or a balloon, and again, a call is when that mortgage is due. Just because it's a 30-year loan doesn't mean they can't call it due and payable at 2 years or 1 year or 6 months. Then you could say to the seller, stay there. Don't move. So we'll talk about that in a second. The next one is the term of the call or balloon. And again, a call or balloon is when the mortgage is due. So I can do a 10-year call, a 10-year balloon on a 30-year mortgage. You can put the call or balloon at whatever you want, in whatever time frame you want. Now, most seller finance properties can easily be sold or refinanced within 180 days of closing after we've done significant property alterations or use changes. So seller financing doesn't have to sound like a 30-year prison. When people start to realize Seller financing is just a short window for me in most cases. They go, oh, so I don't have to wait 30 years for this to be done. I don't have to put at risk the mortgage company finding out about my due on sell clause for 30 years. Oh, gosh, you'll agree to a 2-year balloon. So this as long as this will go is 2 years. Oh, well, I didn't realize that. So that's a big benefit. Number 3 is the collateralization of other real property. So you don't just have to collateralize the property that you're on. Now, if I buy Bob's house for $500,000, and for ease of numbers, I get a $500,000 mortgage on Bob's house in the form of seller financing from Bob, then the collateral for that loan is going to be Bob's house. Now, in short, if I don't make that payment, or I don't keep the other terms of the mortgage, Bob can foreclose on that house and take it back. That's the collateral. The collateral is the asset. So when you do a seller finance mortgage, it's a trust deed and note. The note is the mortgage, and the trust deed is how that note attaches to Bob's house. So that's the collateral. Now, what I have done in the past is people say, I'm not sure I trust you, and I don't want to, Mike, if you do a $500,000 seller finance note on a $500,000 property and you beat up the property and I have to come in, it might only be worth $450,000 if I foreclose on it next year. I say, well, okay, well, how about this? How about we'll do a $500,000 mortgage on this property, and we'll do a $100,000 mortgage on my prized 8-plex over here. And what that means is that $100,000 mortgage will have no interest and no payments. And the terms of that mortgage will say that if you have to foreclose on my property, on the property that I'm buying from you for $500,000, you can also foreclose for an additional $100,000 if the foreclosure on your house doesn't yield a $500,000 value. You can take $100,000 out of my 8-plex too. And all of a sudden, it gets to be very serious. Oh, wow. So what you're saying, Mike, is if I have to foreclose on my house here, that I can go after your 8-plex too? Yeah. Yeah. Now, if I pay off the $500,000 mortgage, it also releases the $100,000 lien on the 8-plex. So I'm not paying $600. I'm just saying I'll give you $600 in collateral, so you're protected. And that's a strong one, where if you're willing to put up more than one property, if you're willing to buy a $500,000 property but give a $600,000 collateral, that's incredible. Now, another way to do this would be I buy Bob's $500,000 property and I don't put a mortgage on it. Instead of putting a $500,000 mortgage on Bob's house, Bob lets me buy his property and I own it free and clear. But I give Bob a $500,000 mortgage on my prized 8-plex that's worth $1.2 million. And this prized 8-plex that's worth $1.2 million doesn't have a mortgage on it. So Bob would be a $500,000 first mortgage on a property worth $1.2 million. Now, if Bob has to foreclose, if I don't make the payments, Bob doesn't get Bob's house back. Bob gets to go after a $1.2 million property. And Bob feels like, oh my gosh, Mike's giving me the chance to really protect myself here. And Mike's so confident in what he's doing, he's going to give me access to another asset, a much more valuable asset. So easy to do when you collateralize other real properties. The other one is additional cosigners. If I buy Bob's house from Bob for $500,000 and he gives me a mortgage, if I sign personally, I'm personally responsible for that mortgage. Now, Bob might think I don't have good credit or good tax returns or good history or good whatever. But guess what? I can add other cosigners. I can bring in people from my power team. I can have partners. I can have investors. I've had investors come in and say, hey, I've got the strongest credit and massive income. And what I'm going to do is just be a cosigner for you. And if you need to show someone my financials, and they can come in and all they do is sign on the mortgage and they get a cut of the deal. They don't have to raise capital. They don't have to go to a bank. And you can actually bring in a cosigner. So when somebody comes in, and that's what a lot of my students would do, is they would bring me in and say, once all these problems came up, they'd show them just a kind of a summary of my financials when someone we were trying to sell their finance from, and then we didn't get asked those questions again. So people were like, oh wow, you've got that person signing on the loan too? Yeah, we're all going to sign on the loan. And I had a power team once that had 5 or 6 members show up to an appointment, and they went for seller financing. And the seller started this song and dance, and the first thing the team leader said was, hey, we're all going to sign on the mortgage. And so what that means is is if you have to foreclose on this property, then you could come after the property itself, but you also have all 5 of our signatures that were responsible for the mortgage. And that really changed things because the seller was like, oh my gosh, so there's 5 of you. And that really enhances my chances, first of all, that you're going to take care of this. Secondly, I get the property back. Third, I can go after 5 people if I take the property back and it doesn't pay me off all the money that I'm owed. So additional cosigners are a great one. So let's go back to the objections now and show you just how simple this is to make this work. I want to go through this in some great detail. So the first one is education. Now, education is they just don't understand seller financing. Now, you don't want to necessarily go in again and ask for seller financing. Go in and say, I want to give you some benefits. And basically start the conversation with, I would buy your property if, and then give them 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 options. I would buy your property if there's going to be an education there. So that's number one, is education. So you have to understand that. Now, the first neutralizer is I don't trust you. Now, trust can come in a lot of issues and ways, is I don't trust you. Well, and if they act like they don't trust me, usually they're very specific about it. And most of those are followed here in 3, 4, 5, 6, and the rest of them. But I don't trust that you're going to take care of this transaction. Mike, you said you do a 30-year loan with a 2-year balloon. I don't trust that's going to happen. Well, okay, what do we need? Now, usually you can do a little bit bigger down payment. Usually you can do a little bit larger earnest money. Usually you could do a shorter balloon. Well, gosh, Bob, I'm not asking you to believe in me for 30 years. I'm asking you to believe in me for 2 years. So that's a good one. So 30 years is trust. Now, I can collateralize another property. So I can put their mortgage on 2 properties. And once the mortgage is paid, then it releases from both properties at the same time. So I don't have to pay twice, but it's released at the same time. So, and a lot of these things, you do a professional presentation, you offer multiple offers on the purchase properties, you do these things, and you're going to overcome the trust issue. Number 3 is the receipt of payments. Mike, I don't believe that you're going to make the payments. So, well, gosh, if we co-sign, let me show you how easy these 4 neutralizers are. Well, if there's on here, do you believe 4 of us are going to be more likely to make the payments? Yeah, well, sure. Well, if I put a slightly larger down payment, do you believe that, instead of 10%, if I buy a $500,000 property, I put 50 grand down, that's a big deal. That's going to give you more security. You believe I'll make the payments. Now, if they really get stuck on making the payments, I've gone as far as saying, hey, I'll do a 30-year mortgage with a 2-year balloon. Let's say that the 2 years, the payments, just for number's sake, are $2,000 a month. Well, 2 years of balloon payments are going to be $96,000. So you've got 24 months, excuse me, it'd be $48,000. You got 24 months at $2,000 a piece, $48,000. So I'll go in and ask for, okay, let's do 100% seller financing. But I'm going to give you the $48,000. I'm going to put in a trust account at the title company. And each month, they're going to release $2,000 from you. We'll give them instructions at closing. So you don't have to wonder if I'm going to make payments. The payments are already there. And so what we'll do is that payment, that $2,000, will just come out of the trust account from the title company every month, and they'll send it to you, and you'll be guaranteed your payments. There will be no worries. And if I don't have $48,000 to set aside at the title company when we close, then don't close. Oh, so gosh, I'm guaranteed that we'll make it. Yeah. Oh, wow. There's other deals where I've done where I've gone in and I said, well, how long do you think it will take you to foreclose on me? And I had one guy say 6 months. So what I did is I closed and I gave him 6 months of payments up front. Now let's assume, just for number's sake, that it closed on January 1st. Now that wouldn't happen because it's a national holiday, but let's pretend that it did. You closed on January 1st and we gave him 6 payments up front. So basically I gave him January, February, March, April, May, and June. So my first payment's due July 1st. Now, instead of waiting until July 1st to make that payment, we made July 1st payment due on February 1st. And on March 1st, then the August 1st payment was due. So we were always staying 5 to 6 months ahead. So what that meant was I was always 5 to 6 months ahead. And I gave this seller the ability, if I ever got down to where I miss 2 payments. So think about this for a second. If I'm 6 months ahead and I miss 2 payments, he still has 4 extra payments. So if I don't make the payment on February 1st, my first payment's not due till July 1st. If I don't make the payment on March 1st, then he can start foreclosure. Well, guess what? During those foreclosure months, he still has the payments through July 1st. So I gave him the ability to start foreclosure on me, even though the property was several months ahead on the mortgage. And what that gave him was the security that he'll have several months of doing the foreclosure while his payments are covered. So I've done those 6 months in advance. I've done them a year in advance. I've done some really cool things that way. The next one is the buyer qualifying. Well, gosh, you're starting to really look like you qualify based on the professional nature of your discussion and your understanding. Well, if I don't qualify, let's get some additional cosigners. If I don't qualify, let's give you some payments ahead. If I don't qualify, let's collateralize another property. If I don't qualify, so you can start to do things and you can occupy, you can do some occupancy. And here's another one let's do for number 3. Mike, I don't trust you're going to make the payments. Well, if Bob's selling the property and he lives in it and it's even a mildly bad market, I'll say, gosh, Bob, let's do a 30-year mortgage with a 6-month balloon. And instead of me making payments to you, why don't you stay there for the 6 months, live there yourself, and instead of me charging you rent, you live there, we'll buy the property, we'll close on it, I'll own it, and then you just make the mortgage payment. Instead of paying rent, you just make the mortgage payment. Your rent, and we'll do this in a contract, your rental payment will be you making your mortgage payment. Now, over the next 6 months, Bob, can I trust you that you're going to make your rent payment? Can I trust you that you'll pay your own mortgage? And I'm not going to ask you to leave, Bob, until I pay off that mortgage. So we'll do that in 6 months or less, or 9 months or less, or 12 months or less. So stay there. Let Bob be the renter. We close on the property, Bob stays there, and he makes the payments in the form of rent. So he can send me the rent and I can make the payment, or I've had sellers where we send it to a third party gets it and they make the mortgage payment, so Bob knows that money's not coming to me. I don't care if the money comes to me. The mortgage is getting paid and Bob's paying the rent. I don't care. That's perfectly fine. So you don't think I'll make the payments? Then you make the payments, Bob. You don't think I'll take care of the property? Then stay there, Bob, until I pay it off. Remember, guys, we're not doing a long-term seller finance deal in those cases. These are short-term deals. So short-term deals. Now, the next thing we're going to do is Bob says, I'm worried you're going to take care of the property. Well, gosh, Bob, we're doing a 30-year mortgage with a 1-year balloon. Stay there. What do you mean? Well, I plan on tearing this house out and building a 10-unit condo project, and stay there until I pay you off. Stay there. Make your own payments in the form of rent. We'll forward them there, and then stay there. And I promise you, I will not take your house down, will not remove your home and start the project until you've been either the property has been sold for a profit or refinanced for an equity position. In either case, you get paid off. Stay there. So this is not like you go move to some other house and cross your fingers every month that you're going to get a payment. Stay there. So you take care of the property. Now, a lot of times, and this doesn't come up because I go in and say, hey, I'm going to tear your house out and put a 10-unit townhome project in. And a lot of times people will say, oh, and I'll tell you, this knocks out a lot of them. This knocks out that I don't trust this guy. Well, you know, dude, your house, $500,000 is a lot smaller than the $5 million project I'm doing. So they automatically think you're very good at what you do. You're doing a bigger project. You have access to funds. If you can get a $5 million construction loan for 10 townhomes, then you should be able to make payments. You definitely qualify. This is just more than let's get this out of the way. It's a nuisance. So taking care of the property, sometimes people say, well, you know, if you do that property, Mike, we do a 2-year call and you take that house out and then I have to foreclose on you, then I've lost the value of my property. So let's say we've got a $500,000 property with Bob on an acre and we tear the house out. Well, that acre might only be worth $150,000, $200,000, might be worth $80,000, depending on what market you're in. Close and his house got torn out, then that is a valid concern. So one of the things I'll say is, well, gosh, I agree on one of two things. I'll agree not to tear the house out until the loan is paid for, or all agree not to tear the house out until the property is platted and the subdivision and paperwork is completed at the city for the 10-unit townhome project. Now, 10-unit townhome project is going to be worth more than your house, even if it's platted and paperwork and approved. So I agree to do one of two things, Bob. I agree not to tear your house out until the loan is paid for or the entire subdivision plat for the 10 townhomes is completed and recorded and approved at the city. And at that point, if you have to take that property back from me, you're going to get a property worth a lot more than your house. You'll get the land back, plus you'll get all the paperwork that's done. So you talk about these in a bigger scale. Yeah, I don't think you have a down payment. That's why you want me to do seller financing. Well, it becomes very clear, and this is one of the things I want you to do, is tell the seller what you're planning on doing with the property. So if I sit down and say, hey, I want to buy your house here, well, you just don't want to, you don't have a down payment. But I say, if I explain it, I'm buying this property so I can tear it out and build 10 townhomes. I do projects like these. We do these in the millions of dollars. This is going to be a $5 million project. We've got fantastic benefits here with what we're going to do to change your property. They don't sit there and think, well, this guy doesn't have 10,000 or 50,000 or 100,000. He doesn't think that. They think, oh my gosh. And if they ask for it, they say, hey, I want $100,000 down on this $500,000 purchase. I'll say, well, I'm going to use that to get the architectural and engineering work done. I've even brought bids and say, here's what my engineering bid, my architectural bid. Here's an estimate for the on-site improvements. So I'm going to use that. No offense, Bob, but I'm going to use that money to improve the value of your property. So again, you don't have any risk because you're going to stay in the house and live here and make your own payments. You don't have any risk that you're not going to get the payments. You don't have any risk that I'll take care of the property because you're going to be living there. And I agree not to tear the house out until you're either paid off or the full site plan and plat work is submitted and approved and recorded at the county office. So you can see how a lot of these things are starting to take shape as objection killers. Now, capital gains. Gosh, people don't want to pay capital gains. And one of the things most people don't know is that capital gains taxes are not due until they receive the capital. So if I have let's say Bob has a $500,000 property and let's say it's a duplex and not an owner-occupied house. And I want to buy that property because I can tear it out and put 10 units on there. Well, Bob might have bought that property for $300,000. If he sells it to me for $500,000, he owes capital gains tax on $200,000. $200,000 at 15%, assuming it's long term, is $30,000. So he's afraid of and avoiding a $30,000 tax for capital gains. 15% long-term capital gains, which is generally 2 years or longer, is going to be 15% of $200,000, which is $30,000. Now, there's a couple things I can do. The first thing I can tell Bob is, Bob, you don't owe and don't have to pay your capital gains tax until you receive your principal. So if we do a $500,000 mortgage and we do 100% seller financing, all the payments I'll make to you, which will be bigger because you're not getting a down payment, then guess what? You're going to not owe that capital gains tax until you receive the principal. So we'll put that off. And by the way, if you do $500,000 at 10% for 1 year, guess how much you got paid, Bob? $50,000. Is $50,000 more or less than the $30,000 you owe for capital gains tax? And by the way, you can get rid of property management. And that goes over very well. Showing them what their capital gains tax would be roughly. Tell them you're not a CPA, you're not an accountant. This is just a rough estimate. But if Bob owes $30,000 in taxes and in year one he gets $50,000 in interest, can you look Bob in the eye and say, gosh, Bob, sounds like that $50,000 will cover your tax? And then you've got your money that you can start playing with and making some real money instead of doing property management with this horrible return. You know, the cap rate on this duplex is 5.5%. If we pay this off, I'll pay you 8, 9, 10% with points and potentially percent of the net profit all day long. So you can make a lot more money, Bob, after we knock out the capital gains tax. So the first thing I'll do is let's not pay any principal. So we better not do a down payment. If you catch that, we better not do a down payment then. Second thing is I promise not to give you any capital or principal until it's enough that you'll cover your $30,000 tax burden. Oh, okay. And by the way, you get rid of capital gains, or excuse me, you get rid of property management, you get rid of the issues with the properties, you get rid of these. A lot of tired sellers don't want to keep their building, they just don't know how to get around that. Now, the next objection we've kind of already talked about is I need my down payment, Mike, for the next property. No, you don't need your down payment for the next property because you're going to stay here until I give you your down payment back. Remember, if I do a 30-year mortgage with a 6-month balloon or a 1-year balloon, Bob can stay in the house, make his own payments, and Bob's not going to buy another house to move into until 6 months is up and I pay off his mortgage with a refinance or a sell. And what that means is Bob gets his down payment. It also knocks out number 9, won't qualify for another loan. Yes, Bob, if you stay here till I pay off your loan, then your loan will be paid off. You'll have your cash in hand and you can go to the next property. The other thing that they don't realize is even if you don't do the property and you sell or finance it, you wrap the loan that Bob has, the money that I pay each month to him in the form of a payment and interest is now going to be counted towards his income. So most people don't realize you'll have more income to qualify with if I wrap your mortgage. Now the last one we'll do today is that we'll do the loss on tax advantages first, then we'll do the due on sale clause. And I pretty much knocked this one out already. You lose tax advantages, but you gain income. Which would you rather make, Bob? A lot less income and have some tax benefits, or a lot more income and have no tax benefits? Well, most people don't realize, oh dear, I can sell this, but if I got a $500,000 duplex and the net that I receive every month is $2,000 after all expenses, and if my seller finances this for me at 8%, $2,000 a month net income on my duplex times 12 is $24,000. If Mike does 8% on $500,000 for the year, that's $40,000. $40,000 is more than $24,000. And no offense, $40,000 is more taxed than $20,000 for most people, unless they're in a huge tax bracket. And that $24,000 on the duplex is taxed too. So they're going to net more money, and sometimes by a ways. Now, what if I did that at 10%? $500,000 at 10% interest is $50,000 versus the $24,000 they were netting from $50,000 versus the $24,000 they were netting after all expenses on their duplex. So not only will they'll lose less tax advantage than they think, but they'll gain more income. And if you had a $50,000 income with very little tax benefit versus $24,000 and some tax benefits, and both numbers are taxable, gosh, you're going to come out ahead with the $50,000. Now, the last one we'll talk about here today is the due on sale clause. But you can see how these 4 things can really, really start making a better option for you. So the next thing we'll talk about here is the due on sale clause. Now, that due on sale clause can be a pesky little bugger because the seller can really think, well, gosh, Mike, if I sell the property to you and you wrap the mortgage, that's called the wrap or the subject to. You do a wrap or a subject to in the form of an all-inclusive trust deed. The anchor on the title. The all-inclusive nature of it is it wraps around any mortgages that are there. And the other benefit is that the mortgage is attached to that title as well. So the first thing I like to start this conversation off with is I've lectured in front of tens of thousands of students around the country, and I've never met a student who has ever had a property called due and payable when they wrap the mortgage. I've never met a student who's met a person or known of a person that has had a mortgage called due and payable. If, there's a big if here, all the insurance is in place, the taxes are paid, the property is taken care of, there's no reason. Mortgage companies are in business to make money, and they make money. They make huge money by receiving payments. And they don't want the payments to stop. They don't want that to happen. Now, if you get a 6% loan, or let's say you get a 4% loan for someone, you close on your mortgage. Let's say you buy a house tomorrow, and you close on a mortgage at 4%. Now you ask somebody on Tuesday, hey, Bob, so Bob buys a house with a 4% mortgage. Bob, what's your mortgage? What's your interest rate? And Bob will look at you and say, it's 4%. And I'll look at Bob and say, no, Bob, it's not 4%. It's about 25%. And Bob will say, well, gosh, what do you mean? Well, the interest rate's only 4% if you go the full 30 years. Everybody knows that the first couple of years, you pay almost 100% interest. So it's a lot higher interest rate in the first few years. And especially, you're not going to get anywhere near 4% for what's going until you pay 15, 20 years off, and then it'll be actually lower than 4% on the remainder of the term. 4%, that's not what you're paying. You're paying a lot more than that. So there's some real benefits there. The bank does not want to stop those payments because so much of those payments are interest, and they want to keep that going. So don't cancel the insurance. Make the payments religiously. Don't tell people you're doing it, meaning don't call the mortgage company. I've actually had a couple of students. I had a funny story. I had a student who raised his hand in my class and basically yelled at me and said, "I will not wrap mortgages," and was very, very aggressive about it. I said, "Hey, that's fine. I don't call this the due on sale clause, guys. I call it the don't on sale clause. Meaning if you're not comfortable, don't do it." So this guy said, "I won't wrap mortgages." Well, and he was very adamant about it. I said, "That's fine. That's great. You don't have to do that. There's a lot of other structures and strategies here." Well, about 2-3 weeks later, he calls me back and he said, I'm not doing well. I said, "How you doing?" He goes, "I'm not doing well." I go, "Why not?" He goes, I wrapped a mortgage. And I said, "Well, weren't you the guy that kept telling me you were going to wrap a mortgage?" And he goes, "I know, but I left and I thought it sounded like a good idea." And I restarted the discussion again. We'll make the payments, keep the insurance in place, take care of the property. Remember, do it short term. We only wrap a mortgage until we refinance or sell for a profit, and then that mortgage will be paid off. Don't worry about it if you're going to take care of that. And he goes, "Well, I got a problem." I said, "What's that?" And he goes, "I called the mortgage company and told them I wrapped the mortgage." And I said, "You did what?" He goes, "Yeah, I just couldn't sleep, so I called them." And I said, "Well, my goodness, what happened?" And he goes, "Well, they told me they'd be in touch with me." And I got a letter a few days later that said, I go, "What did it say?" Because I had never dealt with somebody that was not smart enough to leave the mortgage company alone. And he pulled out the letter and read it to me on the phone, and essentially said, "We just want you to be very aware that we could call this mortgage due and payable at any time." They didn't call it payable. It said we could call it due and payable at any time. Now, I ran into this guy, I don't know, 18 months, 2 years later. I said, "Hey, whatever happened on that property?" He goes, "I still own it. I'm making the payments and nothing's happened." I said, "They want those payments. Those guys want those payments." Now, the other thing that I do is I always ask myself, what's the worst case scenario? So worst case scenario here might be, well, gosh, they call the mortgage due and payable. Now, if somebody calls the mortgage due and payable, let's look at it worst case. So I buy Bob's property. I do a 30-year mortgage with a 6-month balloon. I've made 3 payments. Everything's going fine. I get a letter that the bank's going to start foreclosure. Well, I can call the bank and say, "Look, there's a 3-month balloon. Why don't you wait before you go through the effort of foreclosing on me? Why don't I make 3 payments here for you?" So I'll send you 3 payments. And then I plan on paying this property off by refinancing it or selling it for a profit at 6 months or 9 months or 12 months, whatever the term is. And I tell them, don't foreclose. You don't want to go through that money, and you're going to lose money on that. And don't foreclose on that property. Just wait a few months and it'll be paid for. You can start foreclosure in a couple of months, can't you? Yeah. Well, why don't you wait? Let me make my payments and I'll sell for a profit, and I go through the foundation to success. This is what I'm doing to the property. This is how I'm changing its value. I'm going to either sell it for a profit or refinance it for an equity position. In either case, you'll be paid off. So don't go through the hassle and expensive foreclosure. Give me a shot. Everything's current, no insurance, interest, and I've never had that happen, but that's a compelling comment. So the due on sale clause is that. And the other thing is even if they called something due and payable, it would take them 90 to 120 days to foreclose. Even if they didn't want to work with you, you've got a 90 to 120 days to sell the property, 90 to 120 days to refinance the property. You've got 90 to 120 days to raise some private capital and pay the mortgage off. So you have options there. It's not going to be they call the mortgage due and payable and the sky is falling and everything's lost in one day. Good foreclosure can take 6 months, and if you get an attorney involved, the foreclosure can take 12 months. So you have lots and lots of time, and have a backup in place. One of the things I always did as I started doing seller finances is, and this was after the first few years where I started getting better tax returns and I started having better income, I always had a full mortgage packet ready with my lender. So I could literally call him at any time and say, "Let's get a loan. I'm buying this property. I want to close. Let's get a loan." And he could literally get an appraisal and go to underwriting. almost at any time. And or if I call him and say, I need to refinance this property real quickly, he could literally order an appraisal, maybe get one or two things from me and submit to underwriting, because we always kept a full packet there. Every year my taxes were done, I'd take my taxes and send them to him. Every year we'd update this, that, the other. As those things happened, we'd send him copies. So he always had a complete packet. And we'd go in there, and if somebody ever called me doing payable, then I just refinance the loan. And if you're not in that place yet, then start planning on it to get there. So this is how we overcome these objections. And there's two that I want to add here that you can write down here. On number 5, let's write down, I'm going to add these to the note, that number 5 can be short-term deals. Again, we're not doing 30-year seller finance mortgages. We're not going to do this for 30 years. Now, some people might ask for that, and I might have a reason to do that. And I'm not going to say we don't do those, but most of the time I do those when people want the payments for that period of time. Like if someone owns a house free and clear and they're going to sell the property to me so they can get a monthly income without taking away their asset. Somebody, little old Betty, sells her house that she owns free and clear for $50,000 and she's 78 years old. Gosh, what if she lives another 15 years? And she's going to burn that $500,000 up and use it up, and it'll be gone. With what healthcare costs and cost of living and assisted living facilities cost these days, she'll destroy that $500,000. Now, what if she takes that property, instead of selling it and using up the principal, what if she gets a 10% interest only seller finance loan? Well, she gets $50,000 a year for every year that loan is out. And then at the end of that loan, if I pay it off or refinance it, she still gets her $500,000. So seller financing can be a really, really good option. So number 5, I want you to write down here on your notes, is that you can do short-term deals. We're not asking for 30-year loans. We're doing a 30-year loan with a 2-year balloon, 30-year loan with a 18-month, 12-month, 6-month balloon. And then the last thing we'll put down here is the deed in lieu of foreclosure. Most of you don't know what this is, but a deed in lieu of foreclosure essentially is when you close. Sometimes people say to me they've been so stuck on, I don't want to go through the process of foreclosing on you because you'll take 6 or 8 months, and then at the end you'll file bankruptcy, and then I won't get the house even for another 6 months or a year. And if they're that savvy, then they'll understand what I'm about to say next. So I'll say, okay, here's what we'll do. I will sign a deed that gives you the property back at closing. So when we close, I will give the title company what's called a deed in lieu of foreclosure. Now, what that means is the title company, if I ever become, let's say, 120 days late, so if I ever get 4 payments behind, instead of you filing for foreclosure on me, the bank, or the title company will release to you a deed in lieu of foreclosure. Now, what that means is it'll have a general warranty deed that gives you the property back. Now, they won't have to get my permission. They won't have to get my written authorization. We'll write up front of the contract. If I ever get 4 months behind, they'll just simply send you the deed. At that point, you can drive down to the county courthouse and file the deed, and I don't own the property anymore. And then instead of foreclosing on me, now you can evict me. Now I'm a tenant, and you can evict me. And evictions can happen much more quickly and much easier than a foreclosure. And we can even write in the deed in lieu of foreclosure that I agree to pay however much a month in rent if this gets foreclosed on until I've been evicted. And you have the right to evict even if I'm paying that rent, if you want me out. So what that does is that gives them a big stick. They don't have to go through the foreclosure process. So number 6 would be deed in lieu of foreclosure. So these are the seller financing objections and how we overcome those. So very, very powerful information. I promised you that we'd talk about the 2 to 3 terms method. And I'm going to do that real briefly here because I think it's starting to make sense. And what that means, and we kind of alluded to that last week and today too. And we'll go through that. So basically the premise is this. Let's get back to the terms page. Here's an example of the terms. Look at all these terms: price, closing date, earnest money, interest rate, payment plan, amortization schedule, feasibility deadline, the loan assumption, simple or qualified. I mean, there's just tons and tons of terms here. Now, as I mentioned last week, what you're going to find is that most sellers want 2 or 3 things. You sit down and say to a seller, hey, what do you want to get out of this? What do you want to have happen from this? Then sellers will generally say, I want this price, I want to close by this time, I want this much earnest money down. And no offense, but most sellers don't realize there's this many terms. Look at all these things. These sellers aren't equipped to understand this. They don't know that. They don't know about deadlines. They don't know about extensions. They don't know about the difference in the value of the earnest money in most cases. Now, they always know more is better, but they don't understand the other parts of that. But I'll sit down again. I'll say, hey, I'm trying to accomplish something. Let's do a win-win transaction. What are the 2 or 3 most important things for this transaction for you? And they'll list them. And then guess what? I have all the rest of them left over. And it's very simple how this works. The 2 or 3 terms method essentially states that you find out the seller's 2 or 3 most important parts of the sale, then you utilize all the other terms to make a win-win deal. So sellers are typically, like I said, going to want a price, an earnest money, a time frame. They usually don't ask for much else. So everything else is your playground for good deals. And this is an example for 1 or 2 things here. Well, let's say the seller offers and asks for an unreasonable price. Let's say it's a slow market and they ask for a high price. Well, gosh, I'll pay your price, but I want a seller finance mortgage. And because you're asking a high price, I want the first year of no interest, no payments. So you'll get your price, but it's going to come at a cost. Now, a lot of times they'll agree to what I ask, but other times they'll come off of, and interestingly, they'll say, well, you know, I'm asking 500 and the property's been on the market a year and it hasn't sold. My realtor tells me it's worth less. I don't feel good about not getting payments for a year, so why don't we do 490? I'll say, okay, 490 is better, but then I want 2% interest payments for the first year because it's still overpriced. And so what you're doing is you're working with them and negotiating. So, and there's a lot of things you can knock out with a larger earnest money. You know, sometimes people say, well, I don't think you can qualify for this house. We'll say, oh, how about I put it's a $50,000 house. Most people would put a $5,000 earnest money. What if I put 10,000 down? Oh, well, you have 10,000? Yeah, I have 10,000 bucks. I just don't want to use it on this. Oh, okay. You know, that reminds me, one of the great comments I have about down payments is, Bob, I'm buying your house to tear it out to put in this 10-unit condo project. And the architectural engineering and the stubs and the site work's going to cost me $100,000. I don't want to give you $100,000, Bob, and then not be able to do the project. And by the way, if I give the project $100,000 instead of you, that makes your property worth a lot more money. So you want me to spend that money there, because if you have to take the property back, then it's worth a lot more to you after that. I've done all this work and spent all this money on engineering and architectural renderings. Oh, okay. So the 2 or 3 terms method just basically says you can take any situation and make it a good one. Somebody says they want a higher interest rate than the marketplace. Well, okay, but if it's a high rate, you're getting advantage of me. So I'd like to make it assumable. So I can sell this property and let someone else pick it. Man, if you got that rate, it'd make a lot of sense for you to want to keep getting that rate for a long time. You know, market rates are 4% right now, and you want 8%. Oh my goodness, that's high. That makes a lot of sense. You're a savvy investor. How many years do you want that for? No, I want that for at least 10 years. Okay, well, I'll give you 10 years. Now, I don't plan on owning the property for 10 years, but let's do 10 years on this mortgage, and we'll make that assumable and then keep paying you 8%. And how about this, Bob? If I ever let someone else come in and assume the mortgage, then we'll bump it to 9%. So for me, it's 8%. If it ever gets assumed, then it's 9%. Oh, okay. Well, I didn't know we could do that. Yeah, sure. So now Bob's actually hoping that I sell it to someone else and they assume it. Now, sometimes people have problems with simple assumptions or qualified assumptions. You can actually put in the mortgage. It's only assumed one time. It's only you only have to qualify for that one time. So I own the property. Bob gives me a seller finance note, and I let James over here assume it. Well, then the mortgage says that there's only available for one assumption. So they don't have to do that. So it's a great benefit that way. So again, the 2 or 3 terms method says get the seller what the seller wants, and then you get the rest of those terms to work with to make it a win-win transaction. So again, seller financing is a wonderful, wonderful program. I've got an Amazon bestseller book on seller financing that's on my website at wealthfollowsworth.com. That's wealthfollowsworth.com. You can get on the website and purchase the book. It's worth every single penny. you'll learn an enormous amount about real estate investing. So just want to congratulate you on webinar number 9. Next week, we're going to be talking about capital raising and how it is a great partner to seller financing. So have a great day and happy investing.